Good evening. Wisdom Eccentrics by Ngak'chang Rinpoche, Chapter 41, Part 2. We spent the afternoon listening to strange accounts of Nepalese mafia activity in Yanglisha. Rinpoche and Joma Sampel had left Yanglisha because of it. It was no longer a reliable place to remain. Kandro Tenzin had been assaulted, and several of the old Ngakmas and Ngakmas of Sogyal Gepojong had been robbed. The next day, Rinpoche and Joma Sampel decided to take us all out for a meal at a small restaurant called the Yak. It was run by the daughter of Kandro Tenzin. The restaurant, however, wasn't really quite large enough for our group, so Rinpoche took charge of the situation and we moved out into the area of wasteland behind the restaurant. He arranged for blankets to be assembled and carried, and these were duly laid down on the ground where the picnic was then prepared. The sight brought to mind a subtle blend of Apocalypse Now and Desolation Row. Right now, I can't read too good. Don't send me no more letters, no. Not unless you mail them from Desolation Row. There were piles of burning rubbish. It smouldered like a recently bombed area of a town, emitting a thick yellow-grey smoke. Over in the upper reaches of the area, some grubby-looking fellows were butchering a buffalo. Dogs were fighting close by over the bones that were being thrown in their direction. The dogs, one with a missing eye, emitted fiendish howls and snarls. A grizzled old man over in another corner was desultorily chipping concrete from old bricks. Next to him was a huge pile of unspecified detritus, where a few lepers were sleeping in the sun. The area also served as a shortcut from one street to another, so occasionally groups of people would walk right through the middle of our group. They were polite inasmuch as they avoided treading on our blankets, but not polite enough to walk round us. Flies settled on everyone and everything, but none landed on Rinpoche or Joma Sampel. We sat, drank tea and ate a fine meal together, as if the situation were entirely normal. Sure, we always banquet in some suburb of hell. Chhi'méd wrote of that event for our Sangha News. I was sitting amongst chaos. My senses were being assaulted by noise, smells, sights and textures. My mind could not keep up with the concepts that were flooding in. I found myself in a charnel ground, as Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandro Dzogchen speak of it. There was no possibility of controlling the situation. All that could be done was to relax into the kill core of Künzang Dorje Rinpoche and Joma Sampel Dzogchen. Somehow Rinpoche and Joma Sampel transformed this place simply by their presence. There was a sense of immense dignity in their bearing, and that in turn infused the picnic party with dignity. It brought to mind the teachings I'd received and given on the nature of the charnel ground. This was the charnel ground. There were no corpses, as are spoken of in the texts, but the interwoven chaos and order were a brilliant reflection of the key that the charnel ground offers in terms of recognizing the non-dual state. On this occasion, we presented Rinpoche and Joma Sampel with a terbum. Rinpoche was delighted. This is rare now to make like this. Everyone makes these from metal, but earth is the correct element for the terbum. Rinpoche held the terbum on his head for a moment. This caused a ripple in the group, and Trurig asked whether Rinpoche could authenticate his purba. Suddenly there were more purbas than you could shake a stick at. Rinpoche took them all and rolled them in his hands one by one. It was moving to observe him take them one at a time, rather than dealing with them as a job lot, in order that everyone felt their purva had his individual attention. It's highly unusual for a Lama to take so much care on behalf of people so recently encountered, even though they were disciples of ours. Rinpoche and Joma Sampal's generosity pretty much moved everyone to the brink of tears. Whilst circumambulating the Churton, which is the heart of Bodha, we went to a small shop which we have all frequented for years. We nicknamed the place the Temple of Doom, with reference to the effect the place tends to have on the bank account. The proprietor is friendly and knows us well. He understands that we are not collectors and that we only buy items for our own practice. We have no interest in antiques for their own sake, but there are many things that are no longer made, or not made particularly well, so it's valuable to have examples that can be copied by local metal workers. One such item was an ancient sword of the kind that Lingesa would have carried, and we felt that we should purchase it and present it to Bacha. He'd gone to Nepal in advance of our party and worked hard to make our visit optimal, and it seemed a good time to introduce him to the Lingesa Terma of Rangrig Togden. Bacha had been a Penchak Silat exponent before he became a student of ours, and he was one of 2 ordained disciples whom we'd selected to teach the Gartak martial art of Rangrig Togden. The sword was purchased and presented to Bacha. His first wish was to show it to Rinpoche, and this more than confirmed our choice of Bacha. As soon as Rinpoche saw the sword, he called for a costume to be brought out. It was his own Lingesa costume, which he wore when he performed the Garcham of Lingesa. It comprised the hat and robes. Lama Sonam assisted Bacha in dressing, after which Bacha performed a swirl, as if he already knew the dance. In 2005, we made another pilgrimage to Bodha to visit Rinpoche and Joma Sampal Dechen with our students. This time we brought Robert and Rachel. Rinpoche named Robert Dudul Dorje, demon-slaying thunderbolt. He named Rachel Künzang Dorje, entirely complete lamp of the lake. Rinpoche and Joma Sampal were delighted to see our children and hauled the entire family up onto his throne for a photograph. Rinpoche gave Dudul Dorje a hat and shawl, which he was immensely happy to receive. It was curious that he could sit for hours, hardly understanding a word that was spoken, but was never bored or fidgety. We were proud of him. We went every day with a different selection of students in order that they'd all have a chance to meet Rinpoche and Joma Sampal. On each occasion, Rinpoche regaled us with stories and answered questions our students put to him. Students asked if we would not like time alone with Rinpoche and Joma Sampal, but we felt quite happy watching the scene. We'd had our time, and this was a precious opportunity for them. Kandro Dechen and I were content to sit and listen, or sit in silence. Mainly we were all there simply to spend time with Rinpoche and Joma Sampal. Nothing more was required of the situation. There are 3 important considerations in terms of relating to one's Lama: presence display, personality display, and life circumstances display. These qualities are informal and have to be understood non-conceptually. These 3 modes represent the most powerful and most subtle form of transmission. We'd explained this in depth to our students, and so they knew how to deport themselves. We simply imbibed the ambience of Padmasambhava and Yeshet Sogyo. There was no sense of being gauzy or gaga, no blissed-out rapture. The situation was quite ordinary in many ways. We were all able to be natural in not wanting anything to be other than it was. Then we'd eat momos. Rinpoche laughed. "Yeah, these days I do not teach or give empowerments anymore. I am too old. Maybe to some people I give something, but not when they are greedy tomyos. Several people have come here asking for teachings. I tell them I do not teach anymore, but that if they want to sit and drink with me, they are welcome. I invite them to do this, but then they go away because they are tomyos. This is what I like about your students. They ask for nothing. They are happy to come here and sit with me and Sampal Dechen. Then I give all kind of teachings, as you know. Your students are not avaricious like many who come here now. These kinds of people care nothing about having a relationship with us. They just want to take something that will make them feel important later, when they can say, I got this big secret teaching from Künzang Dorje. In reality, even if I taught these tomyos something, they would get nothing because they do not understand transmission. They cannot receive transmission because their minds are so full of greed and covetous grasping. I think your students want relationship, and so transmission comes naturally. They come here with you, happy for whatever happens. This shows a good mind, so you have taught your students well. They are becoming like you and Kandra Dechen, so Sampal and I are very happy to see this. On the final day, Jomo Sampal presented Kandra Dechen with a full-sized katvanga, a tantric trident of marvellous manufacture. Only 5 had been made. Of these, 1 was presented to Dungzi Trinli Norba Rinpoche, 1 to Kyabje Chatra Rinpoche, and 1 to Rinpoche and Jomo Sampal. The gift was at once a great honour and a fantastic act of generosity, as it couldn't be replaced. I was delighted that it had been presented to Kandra Dechen by Jomo Sampal, as it was given as a token of their complete acceptance of her as my sangyum and teaching partner. I'd had more than I could ever need or desire from my time with Rinpoche, so I could be overjoyed for her. Once this presentation was over, however, Rinpoche presented me with his Zhanak costume and hat. He first wore it himself and performed the seated form of the Zhanak Garcham. Then he asked Lama Tsering to attire me in the outfit in order that I should perform it for the assembly. It was a remarkable day amongst many remarkable days over a period of 15 years. Parties of our students went to see Rinpoche and Jomo Sampal annually in the winter months. Barcha went every year at Rinpoche's request. It was wonderful to see one of our close disciples have such an extremely close relationship with Rinpoche and Jomo Sampal, and to see him adopted as son. I could see certainly similarities between Barcha and myself. We're both quite simple people, and both quite emotional in terms of our loyalty to friends and to our lamas. We're both keen on honour, and neither of us is easy to subdue. An officious monk, replete with Rolex wristwatch, accosted Barcha in the Double Dorje restaurant in Boda, asking him, What is your name, and what vows are you taking that you are this white shamtab wearing?" "My name's Barcha Dorje," he replied. "What's your name?" The monk, bristling with hubris, answered, "In the Gompa they call me Khenpo Rinpoche." "Good for you," replied Barcha. "I won't ask about your vows, but I've nothing to hide. I've taken the 14 root vows and the branch vows which are specific to my lineage. These, as you will know, are secret, but one applies to my white shamtab. I also wear a white shamtab because it's the direct instruction of my lamas, and of their lamas, Kyabje Künzang Dorje Rinpoche and Joma Sampel Dechen. Is there anything else you want to know?" No, there wasn't, and that concluded the interrogation. Khenpo such and such decided he had nothing further to ask, and waddled off with pronounced indignation to inflate his vanity elsewhere. He'd expected Barcha to be intimidated by his monastic authority and his assumed title. He'd been entirely thrown by the fact that Barcha wasn't impressed. He answered the Khenpo's rudeness without ire, but also without fear. He'd spoken plainly and in perfect accordance with Vajrayana. Barcha has had several such discussions in and around Kathmandu. The discussions always seem to take this form, and the discussions are always ended when Künzang Dorje Rinpoche is mentioned. It's sad to see that prejudice against the Ngak'chang Rinpoche remains unabated, and that it has increased noticeably since the passing of Dzogchen Rinpoche. We hope that things will change when the two incarnations of Dzogchen Rinpoche rise to a point where they have the influence of their predecessor. The antagonism doesn't originate in monks per se, but in a certain sector of the monastic hierarchy, which isn't exactly easy to identify. The antagonists are careful not to identify themselves too precisely, and nothing is ever presented in documentary form. It is thus difficult to address the nature of the intolerance and prejudicial behaviour that we occasionally witness. There are many excellent monks and nuns who have no axe to grind and who have no sense of the Ngak'chang Rinpoche as being unwelcome. The Nyingma nuns in particular always seem delighted to see our Ngakmas, especially as some of our Ngakmas are rather tall and ample. We receive feedback on how we are perceived in Boulder, and it has been interesting to observe the shift there. Lama Sonam told Barcha that we were viewed with some suspicion at first, as possibly crazy Westerners, but that our reputation has grown over the years. We are now seen as kind and courteous people who take their practice seriously. Some questions had been asked of Künzang Dorje Rinpoche, and he had let people know that we met with his entire approval. It's sad, in a way, that we had to be checked in this way, but there have been a few too many mystical mashuganas of psychopathic pietistic posers who've donned robes to make themselves look special. It's the same with monastic robes. We saw a group of Rolex-wristed Tibetan monks in the Hyatt Hotel one evening when we went to pay a call on someone who'd taken a room there. They were business monks, and I was surprised that they had no sense of the impression they gave. Why would one renunciate, let alone 5, wish to sport a Rolex? It was almost like the badge of their calling. It was curious to be sneered at by such people, but I suppose I was making my own judgments. They could have been thoroughly decent fellows. Good luck to them, I say. Bachcha and Shardrol led several pilgrimages to Bodha and remained there for several months as parties of our students came and went. Rinpoche and Joma Sampel got to see Dorje and Rig'dzin, Bachcha and Shardrol, all with their own students. They were able to see their great-grandchildren in terms of the Ngak'chang Rinpoche, and Rinpoche said, "You have kept your promise to Dorje Rinpoche and to me, and now everything is accomplished." There is no need to provide detail of every pilgrimage because they were similar in most respects. Unless one had been there on those pilgrimages, a detailed account would entail a great deal of repetition. To those who have met Rinpoche and Joma Sampel, these accounts would be fascinating in themselves, but they are too personal and specialised to convey beyond what is related here. There are many stories to tell, whimsical, humorous, hilarious, mysterious, poignant, and conventionally inexplicable. Kandro and I are likely to tell them, interwoven with what we teach. Each story has its time and place, and each serves a purpose that arises in the moment.